Because in the previous paragraph he said that, well, palmistry looks at the hand, but just as something purely external, but really the hand is something inner when it comes to an individual's fate, their destiny, what it is that they are to be, which includes not only, whether they're rich or poor, but what kind of relationships they have, what sort of actions will be determinative of them. Will they be a thief? Will they be a king? Will they be a great lover? Will they be unhappy or destitute? All these sorts of things are a person's fate. And if we think about this as a bit of an aside, it's not as if we have our own fate totally in isolation from everybody else's fate that we could possibly think of in the world. But that's something that we can hold on to and come back to later. We see in a person's face whether they are in earnest, ernst, about what they're saying or doing. Or at least we think that we do. Right? That's why we are so subject to being taken in and sometimes manipulated, because sometimes we mistake these things, or sometimes people are actually fooling us. Hegel is going to talk later in this passage about the difference between the face itself and a mask that is covering it up, and the fact that the human face can, in fact, become a mask. And this is a little bit of a digression, but this is not something that is totally unique to human beings. As a matter of fact, we see this running throughout the animal kingdom. The pretense to be something other than what one is, or to dispose of one's body in ways that convey a message different than what one really means, right? So territorial fights where the two sparring, or in terms of mating, right, don't actually try to hurt each other, even though they could very easily. Think about bucks and their antlers clashing them together. It'd be a lot more rational if they wanted to get rid of the competition, just gore them, right? Like a bull gores somebody, but they don't do that. Instead, they smack these together and they do that thing. And we could go on and on and on. If you think about other animals that are particularly good at mimicry and manipulation of their environment, like the most intelligent of invertebrates, the octopus, and we can go on and on and on. So what Hegel is doing here is making a very clever joke that works on two levels. It's sort of a beginning and ending of the paragraph, but it also illustrates what the paragraph is talking about. If somebody wants to say, oh yeah, I can tell what kind of person you are, I know exactly how you're going to react, and then you go up and you just pop them one, right? You say, were you expecting that? There's something to that. What is that punching the other person, right? It is not simply the passive way in which the body exists, it's very active. Now you could say it's reactive, right? You get angry at the person, and maybe if you have, the criminal cast that a lot of people who are using this kind of research were particularly interested in. So, oh yeah, I expected that of you. But it would still, nonetheless, stem from the person's agency and freedom. And agency and freedom, which this is something we can generalize about human beings, at least when it's experienced some freedom, doesn't like other people taking away its freedom and showing it a fundamental kind of disrespect. So it responds, as Lichtenberg says, with a good punch in the ear, punching somebody in the side of the head. Or maybe smacking them, that way. So why is Hegel saying this, putting jokes aside and funny images? What is he after here? He says that we have to consider where the real being, the wahres Sein, the true being of the person resides. So he says, what's going on is we've got a science of mere subjective opinion. We've already talked about this. Subjective opinion being, leeres Meinung, intention, saying that something is that way, asserting it, drawing conclusions about, the person's appearance. And this so-called science, this what we nowadays call pseudoscience, has been saying that the reality of a person is their face, or their clothing, or their skin color, or the bones, in their skull, or their genetics, and we can go on and on and on and on, right? So, what can we draw from this? That's what physiognomy is saying the real being of the person consists in. The real being also, what's inside the person, but that's gotten to from this outside. So he says, so interestingly, here's an implication. This is a bit of a digression here. If Hegel's correct in this means that the whole question of whether consciousness is reducible to the brain, or whether, we have something like a Cartesian dualism where there's spirit and then, the corporeal organ, that's kind of a non-starter, actually, within the Hegelian framework. Because, of course, you have an organ. But that organ itself can be understood in two ways. In an objective way, which treats it essentially as a dead thing, even if it treats it as a supposedly living system. And then the other way, which is to say it is infused with, or it is integrated with, spirit. And not just in high-performing individuals, everybody. So he goes on. Now, consider that too, another digression. Hegel has no problem with a sort of evolutionary perspective on the development of human being and all that. At a certain point, we get a creature whose brain function is able to be a sufficient vehicle for spirit, for Geist, for something that we could never guess would have come on the scene. And we get to know, sort of, according to Hegel, after the fact, after it's gone through its process of development. And keep that. Think about that a bit.